The tension in the room was immediate, thick with the weight of an unexpected challenge. The liberal TV host's voice cut through the space like a knife, his demand clear, sharp, and unyielding. "Take it off," he said, his tone carrying not just authority but something more, a deliberate attempt to embarrass, to assert control over the moment. His gaze locked onto Karoline Leavitt, a young but formidable leader, standing at the center of the room, fresh from delivering a press conference on unity, freedom of speech, and the right to express oneself in an increasingly divided world. But now, the discussion had veered away from policy and into something far more personal. The host wasn't just asking her to remove a piece of jewelry. He was demanding that she strip away a symbol of her deepest convictions, her faith, and, as some would later say, her unwavering courage. As soon as the words left his mouth, the energy in the room shifted. All eyes turned to Karoline, their gazes bouncing between her and the small, gleaming necklace she wore, the delicate emblem of her belief in God. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this was no longer an ordinary exchange, but a defining moment. Even those who aligned with the host's views seemed to hesitate, as if realizing that his demand had crossed a line. This wasn't just about a necklace. It was about forcing someone to suppress their beliefs to satisfy the discomfort of others. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead of reacting with outrage or defensiveness, she met the host's hostility with something far more powerful: grace. She tilted her head slightly, a faint but knowing smile playing at her lips, and responded with a calmness that disarmed the aggression in the room. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice steady, not rising to the provocation, but instead turning the demand into a question that reframed the conversation. "My faith. That's what this necklace represents. My belief in God, my strength. And you're asking me to remove it because you disagree with it?" Her words were not an act of defiance, but a simple statement of fact, a reminder to everyone present that this was not about an accessory, but about something much deeper. Her response sent a ripple through the audience, shifting the weight of the confrontation. Suddenly, the focus was no longer on her, but on the host himself. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate her was quickly evolving into something else, a moment of extraordinary poise, where conviction met adversity and dignity refused to yield to intimidation. Karoline Leavitt was never the kind of leader molded by privilege or circumstance. She was shaped by something far more enduring: faith, conviction, and an unshakable belief in standing firm when challenged. Born into a modest family, she didn't grow up with the luxury of political connections or societal advantages, but what she did have was something far greater: a foundation built on faith that guided her through life's uncertainty. Her parents, hardworking and deeply principled, instilled in her from an early age that faith was not just something to be spoken about in church, but something to be lived, something that carried a person through adversity and reminded them of who they were, even when the world tried to shake them. In her household, prayer was not a ritual, but a source of strength, a daily reminder that character was measured not by external approval, but by an unwavering commitment to one's values. "Faith is not about shouting louder than others," her mother often told her. "It's about living with conviction, even when no one else does." These words would follow Karoline throughout her life, guiding her through the many battles she would inevitably face. From an early age, she was drawn to leadership not out of a desire for recognition, but because she felt a responsibility to speak up for those who often felt unheard. She first encountered opposition in school, where her firm stance on faith and conservative values made her a target for criticism. High school debates, college lectures, and political discussions became battlegrounds where she learned that standing up for what she believed in came with consequences. She was often the lone voice advocating for traditional values in classrooms where professors and students alike dismissed her as outdated or out of touch. But she never backed down. Instead, she leaned into the challenge, understanding that respect wasn't given to those who conformed. It was earned by those who stood firm. The more she was challenged, the stronger she became, realizing that true conviction wasn't about winning arguments, but about refusing to compromise on core beliefs, even when it would be easier to do so. That resilience carried into her political career, where she quickly became a rising star, not because she sought power, but because she represented something rare in modern politics: unapologetic faith paired with intellectual clarity. She didn't just talk about values, she lived them. She didn't demand that others believe as she did, but she refused to apologize for her own beliefs. That was the defining principle of her leadership, and it was precisely what made her both a formidable force and a target for those who saw conviction as a threat. The day she faced the liberal TV host, she wasn't just defending a necklace. She was defending everything she had spent her life standing for. Her calm, unwavering response was not just the result of political experience, but of a lifetime of preparing for moments like these. Moments where she had to decide whether to shrink in the face of opposition or stand firm in what she knew to be true. And, as she had done countless times before, she chose to stand. As the TV host's demand echoed through the room, urging Karoline Leavitt to remove her necklace, a symbol of her faith, the weight of the moment settled over the audience. There was an undeniable shift in energy. What had begun as an ordinary political discussion had now become something far more personal, a direct challenge to her identity. The host's words carried an unmistakable intent: to make her uncomfortable, to force her into a moment of hesitation or defensiveness, but Karoline did neither. Instead, she met his aggression with something far more powerful: grace. She did not flinch, did not react with anger or indignation, nor did she allow herself to be pulled into a combative exchange. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of a knowing smile forming on her lips, and responded with a calmness that immediately disarmed the hostility in the room. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice steady and measured, not rising to the provocation, but instead turning the question into something reflective. "My faith? That's what this necklace represents? My belief in God, my strength? And you're asking me to remove it because you disagree with it?" Her words hung in the air, shifting the narrative in an instant. This was no longer about a simple piece of jewelry, it was about something far greater. In reframing the moment, Karoline didn't just defend herself, she exposed the deeper issue at play. She wasn't the one being intolerant, she wasn't the one forcing beliefs onto others. Instead, she was the one being asked to strip away something deeply personal, something foundational to her identity, simply because it made someone else uncomfortable. She let that truth settle, and for a moment, even those who may have aligned with the host's views found themselves questioning whether his demand had been fair. The host, perhaps expecting anger or defiance, seemed momentarily caught off guard by her poise. He had expected an argument, maybe a heated exchange where he could assert dominance over the conversation. Instead, he was faced with a response so measured, so firm, yet undeniably graceful, that he was left momentarily speechless. But Karoline wasn't done. She took a breath, her fingers lightly touching the small emblem hanging from her chain. "I wonder," she continued, her voice unwavering, "why does this offend you so much? Are you really angry about a piece of jewelry, or is it about what it stands for?" The question wasn't accusatory, it was inviting, almost urging him to reflect on his own discomfort. The audience, now entirely focused on her, felt the power of the moment. It wasn't just a defense, it was a quiet but undeniable challenge, not in aggression, but in truth. "This necklace," she continued, "is not just an accessory, it is a reminder. A reminder of the strength I've received in my darkest hours when nothing else could bring me peace. A reminder of the values I strive to live by: love, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every person, regardless of whether they share my faith or not, has inherent worth." By now, the room was silent. Even those who might have agreed with the host's stance just minutes earlier seemed to reconsider. Karoline had done what few could. She had responded to an attack not with retaliation, but with a quiet strength that left no room for further aggression. Her words had taken the conversation to a place the host had not expected, turning what was meant to be a moment of humiliation into one of reflection. In that moment, Karoline had not only defended herself, she had elevated the discussion to something much greater. Karoline Leavitt's words did more than just answer the TV host's aggressive demand. They reframed the entire moment into something far more profound. What had started as an attempt to publicly challenge her faith had now become a defining example of grace, strength, and unwavering conviction. As she spoke, her words did not carry hostility or defiance, nor did she attempt to retaliate with bitterness. Instead, she used a calm, measured tone, one that forced everyone in the room, supporters and skeptics alike, to reconsider what was truly happening. "This necklace," she had said, holding the small pendant between her fingers, "is not just an accessory. It is a reminder. A reminder of the strength I've received in my darkest hours when nothing else could bring me peace." There was no anger in her voice, only certainty, and that certainty made all the difference. Her response stripped the conversation of its superficial layer and exposed the deeper issue at hand. This was not about a piece of jewelry. It was about the attempt to suppress personal belief, to frame faith as something that should be hidden, something inconvenient. But Karoline refused to accept that framing. She didn't fight back with volume, she fought back with truth. "You said I should take it off," she continued, her voice unwavering, "as though my faith is something I can remove as easily as you think. But my faith isn't a decoration. It's not something I put on in the morning and leave behind at night. It's who I am." The power of her words was undeniable, and in that moment, the balance of control shifted completely. Even the host, who had started the confrontation with confidence, now seemed uncertain. He had expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but instead he found himself confronted with something he had not anticipated. An argument he could not easily dismiss. Karoline had not only defended herself, but had done so in a way that left no room for further attack. She made it clear that faith is not something dictated by politics or media expectations. It is deeply personal, something that guides a person's choices, actions, and principles. By the time she had finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The audience, once uncertain, now seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. Some nodded in agreement, others sat in quiet contemplation, absorbing the weight of her words. The host, once ready to challenge her further, hesitated. He knew that whatever he said next would be measured against the clarity and poise of her response. Karoline had not just won the argument, she had elevated it. Through the sheer strength of her words, she had turned an attempt at humiliation into a powerful statement of faith, dignity, and conviction. As Karoline Leavitt stood firm in her response, it became clear that the dynamic in the room had shifted. What began as an attempt by the TV host to humiliate her had backfired, and now, instead of being on the defensive, she was calmly steering the conversation in a direction he had not anticipated. She did not lash out, nor did she try to embarrass him in return. Instead, she simply held up a mirror, forcing him to confront the true nature of his own demand. "You said I should take it off," she repeated, her voice steady. "But why? Are you really offended by a necklace, or by what it represents?" Her question was not aggressive, yet it carried undeniable weight, and the host, so sure of himself moments before, found himself suddenly unprepared for the scrutiny being turned back on him. The audience, which had initially been caught off guard by his demand, now waited for his response, but none came. He had entered this moment expecting to control the conversation, to challenge her beliefs in a way that would force her to either conform or react defensively. Instead, she had calmly, gracefully, and methodically shifted the focus onto him, exposing his discomfort not with a piece of jewelry, but with the idea that someone could openly wear their faith without apology. The silence in the room stretched, amplifying the impact of her words. "You see," she continued, "my faith isn't something I wear for show. It isn't about making others uncomfortable. It's about strength, about love, about knowing who I am and standing by that no matter what. So the real question isn't about my necklace. It's about why you think faith should be hidden." The host shifted in his seat, his confidence from earlier visibly fading. For the first time in the interview, he seemed unsure of what to say. He had framed his demand as something reasonable, but Karoline had effortlessly dismantled that illusion, revealing it for what it truly was. An attempt to force her into silence, to make her feel that her beliefs had no place in the public sphere, but she refused to play along. Without raising her voice, without launching into accusations, she had made it clear that she would not be intimidated. The host, realizing that the moment was slipping beyond his control, opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. The conversation had already moved past his original intention, and everyone in the room could see it. Karoline had taken his attack and turned it into something far more powerful. a quiet but undeniable victory. As the weight of Karoline Leavitt's words settled over the room, the confrontation that had begun as an attempt to shame her transformed into something much deeper, a discussion about faith, conviction, and the right to stand by one's beliefs without fear. But Karoline was not interested in simply proving a point or embarrassing the TV host in return. She wanted to leave behind a message that would resonate far beyond this single exchange. With the same calm confidence she had maintained throughout the conversation, she shifted her focus from the attack itself to something much greater, the idea of unity, respect, and the freedom to express one's beliefs without persecution. "You see," she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience, "this isn't just about my necklace. It's about something bigger. It's about the idea that in a free society, we don't all have to believe the same thing, but we should respect the right of others to stand by their convictions." Her words carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. She was no longer just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had ever felt pressured to hide who they were, to tone down their beliefs to fit into a world that often demanded conformity. "Unity isn't about making everyone the same," she continued. "It's about respecting the differences that make us who we are. My faith may not be yours, and that's okay. But just as I wouldn't ask you to change what you believe in, I won't apologize for what I believe either." The audience listened in silence, absorbing the undeniable truth in her statement. Even those who had initially agreed with the host's challenge seemed to rethink their stance, realizing that true tolerance isn't about forcing others to conform, but about allowing space for differences to exist without hostility. Karoline didn't frame her argument as a battle between opposing sides. She framed it as a call for understanding, for mutual respect, for the idea that a society is strongest not when everyone believes the same thing, but when people are free to live according to their principles without fear of shame or exclusion. "I wear this necklace," she concluded, "not because I think my faith makes me better than anyone else, but because it reminds me to be better, to be kinder, to be more understanding, to live with love rather than division." The TV host, visibly shaken by the unexpected turn of the conversation, had no immediate response. He had set out to diminish her, to force her into submission, but instead he had been confronted with a truth so profound that even he had to acknowledge its power. What had started as a confrontation had ended as a lesson in respect, and as the silence lingered before the next words were spoken, it was clear that the impact of Karoline's message would last far beyond that moment. As Karoline Leavitt finished speaking, a silence stretched across the room. Not the kind of silence that signified discomfort, but one filled with reflection, realization, and quiet admiration. The audience, which had initially watched with uncertainty, unsure of where the conversation would lead, now saw the moment for what it was, a demonstration of unshakable conviction, delivered not with hostility, but with grace. Her words had transcended the debate over a simple necklace. They had touched something deeper, something that resonated with anyone who had ever felt pressured to hide their beliefs, to conform, or to silence themselves to avoid conflict. There was a shift in energy, an unspoken acknowledgement that something meaningful had just taken place. Then a murmur rippled through the crowd. It started as subtle nods of agreement, then quiet affirmations, until finally the silence broke into applause. It wasn't thunderous at first. It was steady, deliberate, as though the audience was processing what they had just witnessed. But then as more people joined in, it grew louder, filling the space with an undeniable sense of support. People who had moments ago been passive observers were now engaged, clapping not just for what had been said, but for how it had been said, with poise, with dignity, and without an ounce of resentment. Even those who may not have shared Karoline's beliefs seemed to recognize the power of her words, the sincerity behind them, and the undeniable truth in her message of respect and unity. The host, who had entered the exchange with control, now sat in quiet defeat. He had expected pushback, maybe even anger, but instead he had been met with something he had not anticipated. An argument so rooted in principle that it left him with nothing to counter. He glanced at his producer, perhaps searching for direction, but the atmosphere in the room had already shifted beyond his control. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then hesitated, realizing that anything he said now would only emphasize the contrast between his earlier hostility and the grace with which Karoline had responded. Even among the production crew, there were visible nods of approval. Some scribbled furiously in their notes, recognizing that this moment would be discussed long after the cameras stopped rolling. The confrontation had started as an attempt to humiliate Karoline, but it had turned into a defining moment, not just for her, but for the audience as well. They had witnessed something rare, a leader who refused to shrink under pressure, who met hostility with dignity, and who proved that conviction, when held with unwavering confidence, could silence even the loudest attempts to suppress it. As the applause swelled around her, Karoline Leavitt remained composed, her expression one of quiet gratitude rather than triumph. This was never about winning an argument or proving a point. It was about something much bigger. Standing firm in one's beliefs, refusing to be silenced, and demonstrating that faith, conviction, and dignity were not things to be stripped away at the demand of others. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate her had instead become a defining moment of resilience, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever felt pressured to compromise their values in the face of societal pressure. The host, who had entered the exchange with full confidence in his ability to control the narrative, now sat with his shoulders slightly hunched, his previous smugness replaced with the unmistakable weight of realization. He had expected to expose Karoline's supposed hypocrisy or force her into retreat, but instead he had exposed something far more uncomfortable, his own intolerance disguised as open discourse. But this moment was no longer about him. It was about the message that had been delivered with such undeniable clarity that it had resonated far beyond the walls of the studio. Karoline had not only defended herself, she had spoken for countless individuals who had been made to feel that their beliefs must be hidden, that their convictions were inconvenient, that their faith was something to be discarded in the name of acceptance. She had reminded them, not through defiance but through unwavering composure, that true strength is not found in shouting the loudest, but in standing firm with grace even when the world tries to push you down. The necklace, which the host had tried to turn into a symbol of exclusion or controversy, remained exactly where it belonged, unmoved, just as she was. The moment had already begun making waves. The production crew, who had initially viewed this as just another tense political interview, exchanged glances that carried the weight of knowing they had just witnessed something rare. Reporters in the room were furiously typing, knowing that this would not be a fleeting moment, but a conversation that would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling, and the audience, who had started as passive spectators, had transformed into participants in a moment of truth, many of them visibly moved, some even standing in silent support. As Karoline prepared to leave, she turned back once more, not to gloat, not to claim victory, but to leave behind one final thought. "What unites us as people is so much bigger than any symbol," she said, her voice steady. "It's found in how we treat each other, how we listen, how we build bridges rather than burn them. If you disagree with me, I welcome the discussion, but I won't hide who I am. And I wouldn't ask you to either." With that, she walked away, her faith intact, her principles unshaken, and her quiet strength forever etched into the memory of those who had witnessed it. Karoline Leavitt's story is more than just a political moment. It is a reminder of the power of conviction, the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs, and the grace required to do so without resentment or hostility. In life, we all face moments where our values are challenged, where the world pressures us to conform, to soften our stance, or to stay silent so as not to make others uncomfortable. But true strength is not about how loudly we defend ourselves. It is about holding on to what we believe, even when it would be easier to back down. For many older generations who have witnessed shifts in societal values, there is a growing feeling that faith, tradition, and deeply held principles are increasingly dismissed. Karoline's response is a powerful example that those values are not outdated, they are anchors that provide stability in a world that often feels unsteady. Her story also teaches an important lesson about respect. Unity does not come from forcing everyone to think alike, Nor does respect mean hiding who we are to fit in. It means allowing differences to exist without hostility, understanding that strength is found not in overpowering others, but in standing firm with dignity. The way Karoline handled the situation, without anger, without attacking in return, proves that true conviction does not need to be aggressive to be powerful. For those who have ever felt their faith or values were under scrutiny, this moment serves as encouragement. Never let the world pressure you into hiding what makes you who you are. Instead, wear your beliefs proudly, not to impose them on others, but as a reminder of the journey, the struggles, and the grace that have carried you through life.